All right. Yeah, I am Aaron Boyd, Senior Technology Editor with NextGov. We're a sister publication of Route 50 that focuses on technology. And one of my hats is as a professional moderator of events like this. So I do 2 to 3 of these a week around these technologies. And I just have to say, especially when we start talking about AI, so often they just focus on the hype and there's not a lot of grounded conversation. Today, I feel like it really has been an incredibly grounded conversation. We're talking about reality here and not just theory and hype around AI. So I'd like to thank our early speakers for having a great conversation so far today. And for this panel, we're going to jump into how these technologies are actually being used in the real world. We're going to see how this is happening in the wild. So just to get started, go down the line here, have you introduce yourselves, explain what you're doing out there to innovate and bring technology into the public sector. Michelle?
Thanks, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Tong. I'm the Digital Services Lead for the City of San Jose. I was one of 4 founding members of our city's innovation team in the city manager's office. We started out 3 years ago as 4 folks. On that team, we've now grown to 12, which is impressive growth, but still tiny in a city with over 6,000 employees. So we very much see ourselves as multipliers. And our work focusing on innovation in the city grew out of a very bold, aspirational smart city vision, which our mayor, Sam Liccardo, and our city council adopted 3 years ago in 2016. As the digital services lead, I'm leading our city's strategy to get towards a vision where all of our city services are easy to use, easy to find, and accessible to everyone, everywhere. We see that digital services matter to our residents because it makes it easier for them to get things done. There's new data from Pew Research out just this morning that 81% of US adults have a smartphone. So being digital is where we need to be to meet our residents where they are. And it's also a way of making things more accessible and inclusive. And finally, when we can deliver digital services easily, that helps build trust between our residents and our government. And we've been starting out by focusing on our 311 reporting app, My San Jose, and also expanding our work to the city's website.
Excellent. Well, one of the things about that just jumped right out at me was when you explained the goal of your office, at no point did you say getting more technology into government, right? You said making services more accessible, making it easier for people to use, and the technology is a component toward that effort. So I like where your head's at with that. Anne, what do you do?
So my goal is to get more technology. No, just kidding. So we're as the CIO of the county. We're right down the street from each other, almost literally. And so we're trying to do things. I think we attempt to do things that are complementary to each other as well as serving our different needs. So the county provides. Most people don't know what counties do, right? But counties actually provide pretty much all the safety net services that people need in a location. So there are basically 2 groups of services we provide and that we're trying to look at digitally. And the first one is about 95% of our residents use very few county services. They pay their taxes. They maybe use the parks, obviously they use the roads, and by the way, Santa Clara County has the most advanced sensor network on the roads in the country, so when you're complaining about the traffic, know that it could be a lot worse. So they're doing a lot of great things to make sure that we have as little congestion as possible.
Or at the very least, that the county also knows that the traffic is bad.
Yes, that's true. We know it's bad, and we'll do our best to fix it. But for those 95% of people who do those things, we want to make the interacting with the county government as seamless as possible, right? So, for example, if you want a permit now, you don't have to come into our office, bring your plans into the office. You can submit your plans online, pay your fees online. You may never have to go into our office to submit your permits or do anything like that. I see some very happy people for that. You can pay your property taxes online on a mobile app. You can make a partial payment, which is important for some people who need that help to budget budget. Many municipalities will not accept partial payments. If you're $5 short, you're late on the whole payment. We'll take whatever you pay us at any point during the year. Doesn't mean there are any late fees if you're late, but we will take your payments in whatever order you want. So that's what we're doing for sure, that 95%. For the 5%, we're trying to figure out how to make the people who interact with the safety net part of the healthcare system. I want to be clear that we run 3 hospitals. They're very good hospitals, right? They're not, they're not hospitals that you would be upset to be in, and we have some very good specialties. But we are also safety net hospitals, right? Which means most of our patients are not private payer. Right, so we've got those folks who are in our healthcare system and our clinics. We've got the folks who are in the law enforcement system, who are in the jails, and people who are getting social services, whether it might be because they're in the foster care system, whether there's been a child abuse issue, or simply because they need cash assistance or food stamps. Right, we're trying to find better ways to help those folks, which have a lot to do with bringing data together to understand more about the whole person and how we can help those individuals. So those are the 2 areas, and they're very different focuses, but they're both obviously very much about technology.
Excellent. I could talk with you two about this stuff all day, but this is really for you all in the audience. So we will save some time toward the end for some Q&A, so start thinking about that. If you have a burning question as we go along, feel free to jump up and wave your arms around and get my attention, and we can address it right away as well. We don't need to be, we can be flexible. So, Ann, one of the things I heard in what you were saying was, or at least I don't know you said it, but it jumped into my mind. It just seems obvious, right, that we would want to be able to do things online, that we have these systems in place. Why can't I just get a permit online? Because it's so obvious, does that mean it was easy to do?
No, it doesn't mean it's easy to do, right? There's our permitting system was a little easier because we actually have a fairly modern system that we use for permitting. Some of our other systems are, we still have a mainframe that we're still trying to, there's nothing wrong with mainframes. We have an older mainframe, let's say that. There are newer mainframes that are fine.
The code, is it COBOL?
It's some of the stuff is COBOL. Okay. It's not all COBOL, but our assessment, the county assessment system is in COBOL. We're trying to replace that. I know if there are folks from the city of San Francisco, they're dealing with the same thing at the county side. So, the newer systems are a little easier because in many cases they're designed, sometimes even the vendors providing that capability. But in other cases, we have to figure out what we want to deliver and then link that to our legacy systems that still sit on the back end. Mm-hmm.
Michelle, what kind of roadblocks have you found from the city level, from the state level, from just interacting with the citizens? What have you had to do to overcome those and push the idea of citizen services in a digital space?
I think the great thing about focusing on outcomes is that there's often a lot of alignment on outcomes when that's where you're starting from. I think all of the public servants that I work with in the city of San Jose, from the frontline staff to the leaders, they're in their jobs because they find it very meaningful to be serving the public, and they want to be delivering services that are helping the public. Where the challenges are, I think, are figuring out how we shift the ways that we work to become more effective at actually measuring whether we're meeting those outcomes and building in the capabilities and the structures that allow us to learn from our mistakes and then improve and iterate and get better. And there are currently, when it comes to technology particularly, but also just organizational hierarchies, a lot of our current ways of doing things can make it difficult for us to collaborate across organizational boundaries and to iterate on our technology implementations, to learn from our mistakes, to learn from what's working and what's not working.
When you and I were chatting before, one of the things you had mentioned was the value of success. Right, when we did 311 app, when it started working and it was giving deliverables and people were using it to good effect, you were able to get more buy-in from the government community and expand that and start to break down silos. Can you talk about what kind of success metrics you were able to show and how that's translated into getting more of that top cover?
Absolutely. So I definitely think that being able to show success and deliver experiences that are great for both residents and for staff is really, that's where you get more people coming on board and being excited and feeling like willing, and also that it's safe to try new approaches. And which is why I think a lot of the digital services work has really focused in the past couple years on showing what's possible. Of course, the next step after you've created a space to show what's possible is that you need to figure out how to scale and sustain that. In terms of delivering value, I think, it's different metrics matter to different stakeholders. So when our council members hear from their residents that they love their experience with our 311 app and that it was magical and that they're so grateful to city staff for caring about their neighborhood and coming and removing graffiti and illegal dumping, that makes the resident feel great about the government. It makes the city council feel great about the work that we're doing. Now, internally, it's also incredibly important to have the staff feel like they're being supported and that we're not just flooding staff with requests that they don't have the people or process to keep up with. So we need to be working on those pain points as well and making sure that staff feel like they're supported, like they have the data they need, they have the processes and the systems that they need to be set up for success.
Excuse me. There were two insights I heard in there that I found particularly interesting. One, kind of a PSA to everyone. So often online, the interaction, the engagement that you get is when people don't like things. But what I'm hearing is it's just as important to say that you do like things. Go to your city, if you have a good app, something that's working for you, let your city government know so that you can get more of that kind of stuff. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, and actually, it's a good point that you bring up about the negative feedback, because that's actually been a big teachable moment for us in our organization with our 311 app. When we first launched it 2 years ago, we created a great feedback mechanism for residents to have transparency into how long it was taking us to respond to their request. We had it on the App Store so they could post like terrible reviews if they had a really frustrating experience. And like many governments, some folks, their first response was like, oh, we put something out in the world and people don't like it. What do we do now? And I wasn't directly involved at that time, but I really was very impressed with the leadership at that time who was able to show, like, this is great feedback. We don't run away from the negative feedback. We look straight at it. We engaged with the folks who had difficult experiences, and we said, great, we know that this isn't working perfectly, and this feedback is going to be incredibly valuable for us to figure out what we need to improve, put it out there again, get your feedback again, listen to it, even if it's really negative, and try again. Like, this is a cycle. It's better to have bad feedback than not to be listening to it at all.
Definitely. The other thing I thought was interesting was when you mentioned the customer experience portion. This is something we end up talking a lot about these days in the federal space. CX is one of the big buzzwords that flies around DC. But just as important with the customer, you have to remember that your employees are customers too, right? That if you don't provide a good customer experience for the employees managing these systems, they're not going to use them to their full effect. What kind of user testing, what kind of inclusion are you doing to make sure that city employees are coming along with you, even if they're not necessarily tech savvy?
That's a great topic. So onboarding the internal staff, for example, for our 311 app, but any of the services that we're transforming, is a really critical part of the process, and I think something that we prioritized from the beginning of our 311 app, which is designing the service from beginning to end, not just the front-facing part, but the staff process along the way. So before we launched the app, we didn't just flick the switch. There was an alpha testing period where the city received a relatively small number of requests, which allowed the staff to test out their internal process of how they were going to respond to those requests. Now that we're 2 years in, our design team has spent many hours with the staff, understanding what the pain points are in their process, doing process maps with them, implementing improvements that are targeted at making their work easier.
Yeah. And I'm sure you had a lot of experience with that when you were at the federal level at EPA. How does managing these work cycles and getting technology in differ from the federal level, working more with local and state governments?
Well, part of it is that at the federal level, very much depends on what you do, right? At the EPA, very little of the technology we delivered was truly facing the public, right? Most of it was regulated industry or states and the tribes, although there's some face the public. What we had called e-enterprise for the environment was designed to provide a one-stop portal for people to understand the local environment and really give them meaningful data about the environmental conditions, as opposed to saying, well, there's 6 parts per million of something in your water, right, that means nothing to you, to actually tell you that water's safe or unsafe. And in that case, you know, it's very hard to get a message out to the whole country, right? We relied very much on the states to send that message. Whereas here, you know, we want to engage our staff and engage our employees, engage the public in a meaningful way. And that's easier to do because we have daily touch points with those folks. Whether that touch point is in a hospital or in a clinic, or someone who's coming to the planning department who say, you know, next time you can submit that online, let me show you how to do that, right? You can put your assessment appeal online, let me show you how to do that. You don't have to come down to our office and talk to us. So we have that one-to-one conversation, whether it's us training the staff or the staff sharing with the public. We have that direct access, which makes it much easier to actually see change and uptick. It's not to say that I can't tell you there were a bunch of visits to e-enterprise for the environment, because there were, but we could really see meaningful change. You know, there is a reason why people say all politics are local, right? There's meaning, and that's one of the things, is because local government impacts your life on a daily basis.
You also recently got some help from the county through a reg change you had mentioned before. Can you talk a bit about what that regulation change is and what it means for your innovation efforts?
Yeah, we changed our procurement guidance so that we can do zero cost and up to $25,000 technology pilots in our innovation lab or elsewhere, but we try and keep them in the innovation lab to keep them somewhat under control. Without impacting future procurement. So if if a vendor comes in and that does a no-cost pilot with us, that doesn't disqualify them for then bidding on the follow-on work. And we have to do some things to make sure we're not doing anything we really shouldn't in that case, because we're not waiving all our procurement rules. But we've made that a lot easier. I can approve those pilots. They don't require further approval. And that was a big change to our procurement policy, because previously we were unable to do that kind of work. And that's certainly not something when I was a Fed that I had the ability to go and, you know, go to Congress and get the law changed with the speed, or at all probably, but given that I was at the EPA, but certainly not with the speed that I was able to get the Board of Supervisors to agree to make this change.
So when you're talking about the difference between working at a federal level where you have maybe a broader view and more resources versus working at a local level where it's a bit more restricted, which way do you feel like you can get more done?
Well, it depends where you work at the federal level, right? I worked at the EPA, so resources were not abundant because Congress has been turning the screws on the EPA for over a decade, and now you've got the administration turning the screws on them as well. So resources sometimes appear very abundant at the federal government, but the amount of overhead sometimes makes those resources very constrained. For example, it would cost me $1 million of overhead to run a contract. Doesn't matter what that contract is, but every year I could have a $5,000 contract, literally, or I could have a $20 million contract. It's going to cost you $1 million of overhead to run that contract. So generally speaking, it's easier, faster, less expensive to get things done at the local level, and it's easier to change things to make them go better if the rules are not conducive, with the exception of hiring, right? And the reason I say this, anything where the unions care, right? If the unions are going to get involved and they care about it, you have to negotiate that change within our county, all 17 unions. So if I want to change a rule that would directly impact the unions, I not only have to get the Board of Supervisors and my boss on board, but I've got to get 17 unions to negotiate that with me. I mean, my updated user responsibility statement has to be negotiated with 17 unions to say, this is what you have to do as an employee, right? At the federal level, I don't have to do that. I can update the user responsibility statement, and if the unions think I've done something egregious, I'll hear about it. But basically, there's a lot more day-to-day management prerogative in the federal government than there is in California government. It's not true all over the country, but it's true in California.
Yeah. Michelle, So when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about these kind of things, like Anna was mentioning, getting around bureaucracy, policy issues, all these things. At the city level, what's the biggest roadblock you run into most often? Is it procurement? Is it policy? Is it culture? What are you fighting?
I think what we're actually fighting is competing priorities, or actually a lack of prioritization. In government, we actually say yes. People think of government as being government says no to everything. Actually, government says yes to too many things. And there's a saying that someone told me recently that I was like, wow, I need to think about that harder, was if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any. And so because government has such a huge mission, as an organization, we feel that every single thing is important. Every corner of our community is important. Every service, every one of the hundreds of services that we deliver, from airports to the zoo, are important. But when they're all important at the same time, it's really hard to make progress on any single one of them. So one of the disciplines that our innovation team has been very diligent at bringing into our organization is that of prioritization. And we do that at a number of levels. Most recently, in the last 2 quarters, we started introducing objectives and key results, which are a fairly simple framework that's getting a lot of buzz now, as it's used fairly widely in the tech industry, but really it's a way of aligning all of the leaders across different departments, particularly for like cross-departmental transformation efforts, that these are the 3 or 4 objectives that we have that are the most important, and this is a finite list of less than 20 things that we're all focused on doing for the next 3 months in a measurable chunk. And that way you can get people's attention, because I think in my role, getting people's attention is really the challenge there. Most folks in resource-constrained agencies are doing 6 different jobs. They have 20 different projects running. And so you want to make sure there are clear priorities, and also align those priorities with what their goals as in their department may be, so that you can make progress. And then I think the other piece of it is that we are changing the way that we work. So we talked at the beginning about outcomes and what we're really trying to get to when we digitize services. It's not digital transformation for the sake of going digital. It's to make the services easier to use. So how do you do that? You have to start with your users. And so as important as the procurement regulations do become, they're actually a downstream problem. You know, when we set out to improve outcomes, we should be starting with user research, not starting with writing the RFP. If you're writing the RFP and you don't know what the pain points of your users are, whether they're internal or external, you're going to end up spending millions of dollars 5 years later and not necessarily have solved a problem that's important to anyone.
Yeah. Again, unfortunately for me, because I cover federal normally, I don't necessarily have the view that you have at the local level, because for federal, that's a novel idea. And they had to rework policies in order to bring user testing in before they were writing RFPs. It took a lot of effort to get to there. In California, is that as much of a roadblock, or were you able to just start doing it and move forward?
So I should probably be a little careful with my answers, because I've got some colleagues from the attorney's office in here. But I think, yes, in a local government organization, we can be a little bit more nimble. We definitely work closely with all of the departments, including the attorney's office. But we have a permit center just downstairs in City Hall. So the user researchers and designers on my team, Julia Nira and Andrew, who are sitting over there, they can just go downstairs, buy some croissants at the coffee cart, and sort of set up shop in the corner of the permit center and catch people as they're waiting for their building permits and say, hey, can you look at some prototypes that we're testing, or tell us which of these labels make sense? And because our colleagues in the other departments work in the same building, we can say, hey, come with us and listen to what, random people from the permit center think about the names that you're calling your service on the website, or ask them what they think about this layout. So it is so powerful. It can be very transformative to get public servants to actually watch regular people use their services. It leads to these moments of epiphany, and we do have the advantage in local government, as Anne was saying, is that we're much closer to our users. And we are now working on operationalizing that, so we have consent forms and privacy and ethics procedures, which are approved by the Attorney's Office. So we're starting to formalize that. We can do some guerrilla stuff, and then in order to scale, we do need to formalize it.
Excellent. And I love that shoe leather mentality of just going down there and jumping on people as they come out of the permit office. If you all ever want jobs in journalism, that's exactly what we're looking for, so come talk to me later. One of the things that you've had because of, when we were talking before about the 311 app, and it was a success, but it was something where you were working on a project and you had control over that project. Now as you're broadening your scope and working on more service delivery projects where you aren't necessarily as in control, how are you managing across silos within the city?
That's a great question, and I think it is an open question for the sort of digital services work that's been happening internationally is, what is the staffing model between having a centralized team that really owns the end-to-end digital service delivery versus a more decentralized model where you are empowering other teams by setting standards or training them on methods, but then basically letting them own it. I would say we are doing a hybrid, and we're having to invent new governance models for our digital platforms that enable us to work across our department boundaries in ways which are different for our organization.
And you recently launched a centralized innovation shop in your area. How's that working out?
Well, so we've had, our CTOs had the agile development teams working for a while, but what we've added is this group of 5 people who run the innovation lab. So we have a test engineer, UX designer, some developers, project manager, and they work together on the innovation lab. That's off to a great start. We've got some very excited people about this, and the goal of the innovation lab is not to deliver code like the development teams do, but to deliver ideas, right? Did this idea work? And then we basically, wipe everything and start over by institutionalizing something if we decide we really want to do it. But I had this question from one of my teams when we launched the Innovation Lab, was actually my team in social services. They said, well, if you've got an innovation lab, what about us? And I said, no, everybody gets to be innovative, right? Just because you get innovation lab doesn't mean, innovation's only there, everybody else stop being innovative. And I used the analogy, because I worked at HP for a long time, of division labs versus HP labs, right? Division labs, their job was, I've got a product I've got to deliver, right, that we want to sell to customers. And in R&D, we're going to develop new capabilities that will deliver that product. And literally, we would invent things on a schedule, which just blew me away when I went to R&D, and they're like, we got to invent this thing by the end of next week. And I'm like, how do you invent on a schedule? But we did. But corporate R&D, HP Labs, their job was to think big, think about future concepts, come out with new ideas that might develop into a product or a division later. And that's how we look at this. So the Innovation Lab is sort of forward-looking, playing with new technologies, thinking about the future. But innovation still has to happen in our groups because we still need to deliver things tomorrow. Now, the Innovation Lab might come up with something that in 3 weeks is out being developed into a product for the county, or it might be 3 years before we use something that came out of the Innovation Lab. So everybody needs the opportunity to innovate, and the Innovation Lab is just sort of leading the way, providing a model. Then the CTO, as I said, has development teams, and then I have development teams out in social services, public safety and justice, and other places where we're doing product development, and whether that's implementing off-the-shelf products or whether that's actually building things ourselves or a combination.
Excellent. I've got a follow-up for you, and Michelle, feel free to weigh in on feel free to weigh in on it as well. But then we'll go to audience questions, so get ready for that. So in your role as a CIO, especially CIOs, it's such a changing thing these days. It used to just be about making sure the email worked. Now it's a whole, you run an innovation lab. How much of your job is pushing innovation in the county, and how much of it is just enabling things like that to happen through platforms and the like?
So the vast majority of my job is about people and culture. right? I spend astonishingly small amount of my time talking about technology, right? And part of it is where we are right now. We just went through creating 139 new job descriptions, putting everybody in these new jobs. It's a big lift, but it's also
technology specific.
Technology specific, yes. So those of you who work for the state of California, opposite direction in which the state went, where they went down to a very small number of jobs. We went to a large number of specialized classifications, put our folks into those new classifications, built a new organization, consolidated 4 IT organizations into one. So we're doing a lot of work about how to work together in this new organization. Part of the goal of that was to create centers of excellence, right? So I have operations for the entire county, almost, together in one place, right? And then I have a team that can be focused on social services. If I get really good at that operations, right, then I've got more resources to put out social services. But to more get back to your question, it's about enabling the conditions for innovation and making sure that, to the point of email, we do all the basic things well, so people will trust us to do innovation, right? Because if email doesn't work, if the network's not operating, if I can't make a phone call, do I actually believe you can successfully do this cutting edge thing for me? Of course not, right? So I got to show up with the table stakes in order to be able to do those other things too.
Yeah. So Michelle, just to reframe it, what's the balance between pushing and enabling?
We've been chewing on exactly this question this week in our office as we're looking at a redesign of our new city website and doing some work to hold all of our departments who are responsible for our highest volume services on the website to usability standards, which we're introducing around ease of use, time to task, accessibility, mobile responsiveness. And the fastest thing would be to say, like, these are the standards, and we're going to jump into your pages for you and edit them so that they meet these standards, and then they'll look good for our residents, and they'll be better. On the other hand, if we do that once, there are 1,000 different pages and 100 different web contributors in our organization across 20 different departments. So if we do it for them once and we haven't taught them how to do it, then there's no scale and sustainability there. I think we are, in the early stages, which we are still at in terms of our digital services strategy. We need to be both doing the work to show what's possible, which is carving out a space where our team has a little bit more freedom to use more tools, to work in different ways, to do user research, and to bring people into that, and then working towards supporting those other teams to do it themselves as they feel ready, which can also include encouraging and helping other teams hire new types of talent. And actually one of the folks on our team is an example of that. We held a Digital Services Academy where the assistant director of HR was exposed to the actual user experience of applying for a job on the City of San Jose website, which you can only do online, so you have to go through this experience. And she realized, wow, it is one of the highest priorities of the city to be hiring great talent. And so this user journey to apply for a job is their first impression of the city. We need to be doing more to bring this up to make it a great experience. And so she hired someone into her department to help her do that.
I don't know, a complicated hiring process could be a good IQ test for whether or not you could actually work here. So do we have any audience questions, or should I keep going? And we got one. We'll start in the corner here.
I work for the Office of Contract Administration for San Francisco, focusing primarily on technology, purchasing, and contracting that adds up in our office from the various 60 city departments.
Bless you.
Yeah. And prior to that, I worked for SFPUC and IT services, where I worked closely with helping the project managers and the IT business managers buy what they needed to buy. What I've learned and noticed in the last 5-6 years is that the IT business managers and decision makers are definitely all about innovation, finding new solutions, and the new shiny toy, all that stuff. But given that we're in government and most people have to use our services, they don't have a choice, and in so doing, they share their data with us, I find that the IT business managers don't really ever think about that. or before even approaching a solution, think about like, where's this data going to go? How is it going to be protected? They don't even consider that. It's an afterthought. And I'm just wondering, and then, they send their stuff to us, and then someone like me is like, well, did you think about that? And then they get all mad because they just want their solution, and, we'll deal with the data later. So from your perspective, for your city, how do you guys approach that problem? Do you address it up front? Is it just an afterthought? Especially since most technology is now going to the cloud, and you're sharing a lot of data with a lot of private companies. Do you care that they're selling that data? Do they own the data? Do you own the data? Does your contract ensure that you own the data and they don't sell the data? I'm finding a lot of challenges dealing with those issues, even though it's not even my role. I'm just the reviewer. But people in your position don't seem to be addressing those up front.
So okay, I'll start. One of the in our software development lifecycle or product development lifecycle or purchase, it's all the same lifecycle, just different depending upon what you're doing, whether you're building or buying. One of the there are stage gates at various points that involve security, privacy, and compliance. Right, and so we look at that and say, first of all, is this something that's an issue for, right? I mean, if I'm buying a server, buying the infrastructure itself, it's not an issue, right? The issue comes when the project comes up where I'm going to put something on that server, or if I'm going to put something in the cloud, right? What's that mean? And so, in fact, there's also the issue of data sharing, and at the hospital, the chief healthcare technology officer who works for me, he is the first place where data sharing ideas have to pass muster, right? So he's delegated from the COO that if he doesn't think it's a good idea, it's done, right? And then there's obviously compliance folks, there are lawyers, but the first stop is whether we think this makes sense and it's a good idea to do it, right? That's sort of our first step. But very much, it's been a struggle, to your point, to get everybody to think about those things. And we had an incident recently, which I'm not going to say anything about other than we had an incident, where someone really didn't think about those things and did something really dumb, right? Which caused a whole bunch of people to go, oh my God, right? And it was very eye-opening. But it didn't do any damage, right? But it was that moment where, we caught something on the brink of doing damage and reeled them back. But the getting that visibility, getting people in your organization to understand it's important, right? Everybody has to understand it's important. While we can put all those stage gates in, there are still plenty of opportunities to do dumb things later, right? If we don't all understand it's important. So I think that's the key, is we've got to educate people along with putting the checkpoints in to make sure that people are following the rules.
Yeah, as you mentioned before, Anne, technology problems are so rarely technology problems, and what I find is very often I'm talking about procurement and acquisition, which is why I said that God bless you at the beginning of that, because while the procurement people shouldn't be the first line of defense on that, you are the last line of defense, right? Those data protections, those should be getting written into SLAs. They need to be a part of that process. So it's great when people are thinking at the top, but it's nice to hear that that last line before something gets signed, that someone's looking at that and saying, what are we going to be doing with this? What are the ethical ramifications here? Yeah. More questions?
So, my question is on kind of the flip side, all of that data collection. How do we see the future in terms of predictive analytics? Because right now, people come to our sites and they put in what they want, and especially the younger generation, they're used to people that ask this question also ask this question. Is this something you're interested in? And I don't see us there yet, and that just is an expectation now.
If I could add one more on top of that as you talk about it, how do you, as you're dealing with those and incorporating more of those, how are you eliminating biases so that it's directing people toward what they actually want, not what you think they want?
That's a great question. I think from my point of view, the prerequisite with any of these emerging newer technologies is that we need the same, there's certain skill sets that we need to have in-house, whether we're dealing with a 20-year-old technology like web forms or a 2-year-old technology like a recommendation engine or a 6-month-old technology like the latest AI algorithms, which is we need user researchers and designers, because a great and a secure and private customer experience isn't going to happen by accident. It has to be designed very intentionally, understanding, what the positive and negative outcomes are from that experience. And then we need product managers who can prioritize the feature sets that are going to deliver the biggest impact. I think I do see us going in that direction, and there is a fine balance. I think government is held to a higher standard in terms of privacy and what data we're tracking on our residents than the private companies.
And probably should be.
Yeah, and let me add to that. So, we've been looking at predictive analytics in that space of the intersections, well, not the whole person care situation in terms of understanding people and being able to care for them, but also the intersection between healthcare, social services, and law enforcement. And there's a lot we can do with predictive analytics in that space, but it's really hard to be able to use the data, because you've got 3 different sets of rules, or more sometimes. When you get social services, they're even more granular. But you've got HIPAA, you've got CJI, and then you've got sometimes HIPAA in social services and sometimes specific state laws. Trying to figure out how we can pull data together and use it is really, really hard, but we think there's tremendous value that we can, if we see that every time there's a police call to this address, this person shows up at the emergency room 3 hours later, right? There's something going on there, and how could we get in and do some intervention to avoid that happening? So we think there's huge potential there. It's a little different part of predictive analytics, obviously, than you were asking about, but it's very hard to legally do all that, right, and protect people's privacy.
And unfortunately, that's our time, but you two will be around for a little bit at least if people want to ambush you afterwards. So please join me in thanking our great panel.